Hello, everyone. Good evening, and welcome to Baltimore County Dialogues on Race, a series in which we expand the conversation around topics such as education, voting rights, police reform, and health equity. These discussions have been made possible through a collaboration by the Baltimore County Public Library, the Baltimore Human Relations Commission, and the Baltimore Office of Equity and Diversity. Tonight, we turn our attention to environmental justice and community equity and sustainability. The United States Environmental Protection Agency defines environmental justice as the fair treatment and meaningful involvement of all people, regardless of race, color, national origin, or income, with respect to the development, implementation, and enforcement of environmental laws, regulations, and policies. This goal will be achieved when everyone enjoys the same degree of protection from environmental and health hazards and equal access to the decision-making process to have a healthy environment in which to live, learn, and work. However, equal access to health for our most vulnerable citizens, minorities, and the poor is not the reality. Dr. Beverly Wright, a sociologist and CEO of the Deep South Center for Environmental Justice at Dillard University, stated that communities of color are disproportionately impacted by being more likely to live near toxic facilities and in places with higher incidences of climate-related diseases, floods, and a lack of access to health insurance and medical services. And history tells a repeated tale. Hurricane Katrina, Dakota Access Pipeline, Flint, Michigan water crisis, toxic coal ash being shipped more than 300 miles from a Tennessee Valley power plant spill, where it was dumped in a landfill located in rural and mostly Black Perry County, Alabama. These circumstances create an alarming pattern of the fatal consequences of environmental injustice on people of color and their progeny. The most often quoted definition of sustainability comes from the UN World Commission on Environment and Development. Sustainable development is development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. The UCLA Charter and other research reminds us that the issues of environmental health, social and community equity, and economic vitality are interconnected and complex. Tonight, we take a deep dive into historic patterns, corporate practices, community, and individual empowerment toward unraveling the difficult question of how to create thriving, healthy, resilient communities in Baltimore County and throughout our nation for this generation and generations to come. Before we get started, I would like to say a few words of introduction about our fantastic moderator, Faraji Muhammad, and then Faraji is going to introduce our esteemed panel. Faraji Muhammad is a media personality with the special skills of community organizing and non-professional management from Baltimore. Throughout Baltimore, Faraji is known as humble in spirit and high in energy. As a community servant, musical artist, writer, and speaker, he has used his passion for young people to advocate for their concerns. Faraji made his mark in broadcasting 15 years ago as creator and host of Listen Up, that aired from 2005 to 2017 on WEAA 88.9 FM. From 2015 to 2016, Faraji was invited to the Radio One family by Miss Kathy Hughes herself to serve as a co-host for the Larry Young Morning Show on Praise 106.1 FM and WOLB 1010 AM in Baltimore. With that platform, Faraji used his brand of blending political and social justice knowledge with satirical humor and cultural insight, and became a much needed voice about issues for next generation leadership, police brutality, politics, education, and more. He has been a guest on CNN, Matter of Fact, NBC, NPR, and other news outlets. He formerly served on TV One's News One Now and NPR's All Things Considered as a contributor. Faraji is the former host of the Associated Press award-winning daily news and cultural show, For the Culture, which aired on Public Radio 88.9 WEAA FM, Morgan State University. On that platform, Faraji discussed many topical issues from politics to education to health, Black arts, and culture. And today, Faraji is a writer, community organizer, and weekly contributor for the Roland Martin Unfiltered Daily Digital Show on Thursdays at 6 p.m. Welcome, my friend, Faraji Muhammad. Welcome, Faraji.
There we go. Brenda, thank you so much. I truly appreciate the opportunity once again and the time to once again have a very, very important dialogue about a topic that I think is highly important, but don't quite get enough attention, which is this issue of environmental justice and sustainability. So I just wanted to thank you personally, Brenda, but also thank the wonderful team of the Baltimore County Public Library System for once again having this platform. And I want to encourage all of our watchers here tonight that we want you to be engaged in this discussion just as much as we are, and we will be. And so there will be an opportunity to do some Q&A. We ask that at the bottom of your screen that you post your questions and your comments, and we're going to do our part to make sure we get through those questions and comments. Now, I must say to you that if certain questions seem to be repetitive, we will just say one question or that one question versus asking that same question over and over again. But tonight, we want to have a much needed conversation, from advocates to activists to even one environmental justice youth leader, to give us some insight about what it means and what it takes to take us to the next level and to truly understand why it's important for us to become more conscious about the environment, and also why it's important for us to invest in sustainability efforts that are happening in Baltimore County and around the state of Maryland. So I want to get started by introducing all of our wonderful panelists tonight, because we all have some very, very powerful voices. First, we want to start with Mr. Jan Michael Archer. Mr. Archer is a doctoral student at the University of Maryland School of Public Health and UMD NSF Global Steward Fellow. Frustrated with the general lack of diversity and inclusion in conservation groups, Jan left outdoor education to pursue a career in research, policy, and action. As a member of the Center for Community Engagement, Environmental Justice, and Health, Jan has worked across public, private, and nonprofit sectors to develop mapping tools and low-cost sensor networks that empower community members to collect, visualize, and interpret environmental data in their own neighborhood. So Jan, thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Unfortunately, he is not here yet, but hopefully will be soon.
Oh, there we go. Thank you so much. Do we have Stephen with us tonight?
Yes, I'm here.
Oh, yep, Stephen, thank you so much. Stephen Lafferty currently serves as the director of the Department of Planning for Baltimore County. He joined the administration of County Executive, Mr. Johnny Olszewski, in September of 2019 as the Chief Sustainability Officer and became Planning Director in January of 2021. Prior to joining the Olszewski administration, he was a member of the House of Delegates from the 42nd District in Baltimore County for 13 years, where he served as the served on the Environment and Transportation Committee and held various leadership positions. Mr. Lafferty, thank you so much, sir, for joining us for this conversation tonight.
Thank you, Faraji. Absolutely.
Up next, we have Ms. Imani Black, who is an oyster farmer building a career in the rapidly growing aquaculture industry. Now, she was born and raised on the eastern shore of Maryland, and her love for conservation and restoration on the Chesapeake Bay started at a young age. Now, she comes from a long family history of watermen from Rock Hill, Crisfield, and Cambridge, Maryland, that dates back over 200 years. She attended Old Dominion University and graduated with a marine biology degree. For the last 2 years, Imani has served at the first privately owned hatchery in Maryland as a lead hatchery technician and assistant manager. And her passion for the aquaculture industry led her to launch Minorities in Aquaculture, MIA. Through MIA, she seeks to promote the benefit and sustainability of aquaculture, both in the Chesapeake Bay and worldwide. And by sharing her experiences, she works to educate and encourage minorities to pursue a career in all aspects of aquaculture. Imani, thank you so much for joining us. We truly appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. Also joining us is a woman who I'm familiar with. She's been doing this work for a very long time in the city of Baltimore and across the state of Maryland, Ms. Ruth Ann Norton. She serves as president and CEO of the Green and Healthy Homes Initiative, which is a nonprofit organization that is dedicated to advancing racial and health equity and opportunity through healthy housing. Now, she's a national expert and advocate on green and healthy homes. She directs GHHI's groundbreaking work across the United States in 65 cities, counties, and states, and are currently using housing as a platform for improved health and social outcomes. Now, through the implementation of the GHHI Comprehensive Housing Intervention Model in its best practices toolkit, cities are improving the ability of children to arrive in the classroom healthy and ready to learn and to stay in school through reduced asthma-related absences. The architect of the state of Maryland's 99% reduction in childhood lead poisoning, Ms. Ruth Ann Norton, has developed over 45 pieces of successful healthy housing legislation that focus on reducing health disparities. So we're always happy to hear from an expert like Ms. Ruth Ann Norton. Ruth, thank you so much for joining us.
It's so good to see you again. When I saw your picture came on, my heart warmed. And Delegate Lafferty and Imani, so good to meet you. I'm glad to be here in this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. Also joining us is Ms. Jen Iosa, who is the Chief Sustainability Officer for Baltimore County, responsible for guiding policy and programmatic changes to increase the county's resilience to climate change and integrate sustainability into county operations. Now, prior to her joining the Olszewski administration, Jen spent the past 25 years working at the intersection of science and policy focused on water quality, climate resilience, and agriculture in Maryland and the Chesapeake Bay region. Now, prior to her role in Baltimore County, Jen was the executive director of Blue Water Baltimore, the Baltimore region's largest environmental nonprofit. She has held positions as a senior scientist with the Chesapeake Bay Foundation and vice president and director of programs at the Chesapeake Conservancy. Now she holds a BS in marine science from the University of South Carolina and an MS in environmental sciences from the University of Virginia. Jen, thank you so much for joining us. Good to see you.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
And last but certainly not least is a young leader in the environmental justice movement. She is a 19-year-old artist and climate justice organizer located right here in Baltimore. Nadia Nazar is a founder and art director of the youth-led climate organization 0 Hour. She is currently a high school student and is working towards implementing climate action in her school community and school county. Nadia also has used art as an outlet and tool for awareness on the climate crisis. She designed the 0 Hour logo, various artworks for action, and continues to lead creative spaces in the youth climate movement. In October of 2018, Nadia spoke at the United Nations headquarters about the impact the climate crisis is currently having on girls around the world. In February of 2019, she testified in Congress at the House Natural Resources Committee's first hearing on climate change in the 116th Congress. Nadia was also named one of the 2018 top 25 women changing the world by People magazine. Wow, she's only 19.
Thank you for having me. I'm
Absolutely.
actually a sophomore in college now.
Oh, you're a sophomore in college?
Yeah, I
You
was
grew
in
up
high
so
school
quickly,
before.
Nadia. You grew up too quick. And we just,
Yeah.
Absolutely awesome, awesome. Now, also just to let folks know, you plan on continuing your artful climate activist work in order to hold corrupt corporations and elected officials accountable. Get at them, Nadia. Let's go for it. Let's go for it. First and foremost, Nadia, again, thank you so much for joining us. But to all of our esteemed guests tonight, we thank you for being a part of this conversation. I'm really, really excited to talk to each and every one of you. I want to start here because Brenda started with the definition from the EPA about environmental justice, and essentially that being something I think that a lot of people are still trying to kind of wrap their minds around. And so, Mr. Lafferty, let me start with you. And I know this comes directly from the Environmental Protection Agency, but I'm wondering, sir, when we hear that that a lot of this talk about environmental justice is about fair treatment, and a lot of this is about having access and to natural resources, do you think that really drives the point home for people to wrap their minds around environmental justice? I feel like it's such a big word. Sometimes we use it just kind of haphazardly. So how do we make sure that we are clear about what the problem is and how to address it?
Well, Faraji, thank you very much for the questions. It's good to be here with such a great panel, and I think Nadia tops the cake for all of us, really, as far as what she's achieved in her younger life than the rest of us have. I think we also need to start from the perspective of environmental injustice and where the challenges are in communities of color particularly, or also more vulnerable communities, certainly that we see in the county, but we see nationally. And it's sometimes a lot more subtle than where is there a landfill, or is there smokestack pollution that endangers communities like they're seeing in South Baltimore, to really, is there adequate access to healthcare? Is there adequate access to addressing even small pollutants or flooding that may occur in communities? Turner Station in Baltimore County is largely built on a floodplain. And although it is a thriving, healthy, vibrant neighborhood and community, it's being faced with flooding problems in many, many levels. So I think we're definitely needing to redefine what we're looking for in the, just even the word justice. What is equity? What is fairness in how we're dealing with communities? Fortunately, the county, Baltimore County, is starting to look more intently at the disparities that occur. And part of it certainly is where we're going to invest to provide park land or access to parks, where we're going to better ensure that there are, that we're taking care of, flooding problems, or looking at other kind of challenges that the environment, that are to the environment in the county. But we're woefully behind, and know that we need to really sort of step up our game, as it were, because even when we're looking at, issues of access to solar renewable energy, or to electric vehicles so that people can be more energy conscious, and get community solar, for instance, into neighborhoods that are more low income. I mean, these are things that we all have to bake into what we're going to try to do.
And Mr. Lafferty, I appreciate that. And I think I would have to agree with you, sir, in saying that the scope of injustice pushes us and compels us to redefine what we currently see as being environmental justice. So I would agree with that. And I want to get your take on this. And then Ruth, I would love to hear your thoughts on this as well. But specifically, Mr. Lafferty, because it came out that Baltimore County is planning to use $60 million in federal aid for social programs. There is some talk about part of that money going towards sewer restoration, water system. Give us some insight about this, and for those who are living in Baltimore City or Baltimore County, how will that affect the citizens in those areas?
Well, one of the real big challenges, and Jenny Osa can weigh in on this as well, is it has to do with stormwater management. And, with the more intense rains and more frequent rains that we're seeing because of climate change, we are challenged to find ways to meet more of the needs in communities because our infrastructure is old in the city and the county both. And really, there's just not enough money to go around. I think the county executive's focus primarily with the ARPA money, the federal money, is really more on recovery and resilience so that communities really have some more stable foundations to build around. The stormwater management is part of that in some aspect, some areas of the county. We're under a consent decree to address our sewer problems. And so we've already invested really over the last decade or more, over $1 billion, but we're far from having that solved. We don't have, fortunately, the same sort of sewer backup problems that the city tends to have, but we still have failures that we have to make sure are addressed because of making sure the waterways aren't polluted.
So Baltimore County is currently under a consent decree because of the sewer and water system.
Sewer system this goes back nearly a decade.
Okay.
And so we've had to invest money over the last 10 years or so to address those problems, leaking pipes and therefore contamination in too many of the waterways.
And Jen, I want to get your take, and then let's go to Ruth. But Jen, talk to us a little bit about that, because when I hear consent decree, as a resident of Baltimore City, we're talking about the police department. But now when we're, I'm saying that's the police department.
Just the truth, isn't it?
But
Yeah, I mean,
when we're talking about a consent decree for an environmental issue, that's really interesting to hear. Talk to us a little bit about that.
yeah, so they really start from the same place. So in the case of Baltimore City and Baltimore County, we have we have a sewer system that is connected. It's all connected and it goes to 2 treatment plants. There are thousands of miles of underground pipes that is conveying that sewerage to the treatment facilities. But it's out of compliance with a federal law. And that's the baseline for a consent decree. I did see a question in the Q&A. A consent decree is basically a legally binding order that says you need to get in compliance with a particular law or set of laws. And so by virtue of the fact that Baltimore City and Baltimore County have this leaky, kind of aged system of pipes that is leaking untreated human sanitary sewer, we are out of compliance with the Federal Clean Water Act, period. And so now both the city and the county are under legally binding agreements with the Federal Department of Justice and the EPA to fix those pipes, to clean up those leaks, and to make sure that the waterways that run through our neighborhoods in Baltimore City and county aren't being polluted by this sanitary sewer system. I'll tell you.
But Jen, what's the timeline for this specific consent decree? What is the government putting on the county?
Yeah, so in Baltimore City and Baltimore County, I have to say, have 2 separate consent decrees for their own portion of the pipe network.
Okay.
I believe the initial consent decree in the city was back in 2001. It was supposed to be completed by, I think, 2016 or 2017. And unfortunately, at that point, the city said, we're not even close. And so it has now been extended to, I believe, 2030. The county has, again, its own consent decree. And I don't want to tell you, I don't want to tell you the wrong set of dates, but as Steve said, the county has been working for at least the last decade to fix pipes and other parts of the infrastructure that they are responsible for. I'll tell you this, Faraji, you noted that when most folks hear consent decree, especially I've been in Baltimore now for 21 years, they think about the police. All of this was so under the radar because I think for too long, a lot of environmental issues were considered to be less important. They weren't the big ticket items. But as soon as we started making connections to environmental problems like the sewer system and public health, and the fact that when it rains, because these pipe networks are so leaky, they actually overflow because rainwater gets into our sewer network and it overflows. And unfortunately, often it overflows into people's homes, their basements, the streets where they park their cars or their kids play. And that is a public health nightmare. And only when those connections started being made did we see these environmental issues really sort of elevating so that more folks were taking notice and were figuring out how to be part of the solution.
Jen, thank you so much. So Ruth Ann Norton, I want to bring you into this part of the conversation because, when we are hearing about bad water or sewage pipes going bad, and Jen hit the nail right on the nose. It affects your home. It uproots the foundation of your home. It takes down the property value of your home. And unfortunately, we're finding, Ruth, that a lot of these problems are happening in quote unquote disadvantaged neighborhoods, low-income neighborhoods, where a lot of residents and citizens don't feel like they have the political know-how, they don't have the financial resources to combat or to at least change this. So give us some insight about the challenges and how folks should start to move, or how communities should start to move into a space where they're confronting this problem and they're getting the support of their government and other agencies.
Let's just admit that what is happening is piling on to generations of disinvestment, of lack of ill-conceived, unjust, even racist policies that happen around housing development, housing code enforcement, investment. And it is what it is, right? And it left us where the federal government in 1937 came out with a uniform housing code to improve the health and safety of America, and in 1938 mandated the use of lead-based paint in low-income housing and low-income communities. We can just start almost there and think about the disinvestment and the environmental, social, and racial injustices around housing stock. And, as we think about the flooding of basements, like people live in basements too, this becomes a really human threat in addition to public health hazard. And as we're thinking about how do we address this intersection of so many things that start at home, mold, mildew, moisture leads to asthma. Asthma leads to reasons kids miss school. It leads to high cost for not only vulnerable kids, but seniors. But we're also talking about housing stock that's laden with lead, that is energy inefficient. And now we're on a race to climate. And we've got a couple of things at play here. First and foremost, every organization in the country has hit, one after another inflection points on race and racial disparities and racial equity. And yet at our homes, we lose equity in the African-American, Black and Brown communities and the lowest income communities because Housing stock is allowed to deteriorate, allowed to be built in floodplains, and there's a disinvestment. And so there's not intergenerational wealth transfer of real estate
Mm.
that happens as a common practice in the white community. We have a devalued set of housing. And now as we're thinking about decarbonizing housing and getting rid of the dependence on oil or natural gas and thinking about electrification and thinking about solar, we can't do that until we actually take care of health and safety to get to the baseline, to not once again incrementalize, leave behind low-income communities. So let me give you just a little bit on that kind of pathway, right?
Mhm.
62% of homes referred to weatherization and energy efficiency programs in state, federal, and local programs in our lowest income communities are deferred and declined because of lead, mold, mildew, moisture, trip and fall hazards in the home.
Wow.
So where that money, that investment for the future, for climate, to bring it home and to really engage communities and ensure that we can lead a different path, right? And a different normalization for low-income communities is stopped right there. And, we, as houses deteriorate, the dependence on natural gas and gas stoves is causing low-level carbon monoxide poisoning that is slightly below public health detection, but is having neurological impacts. Lead in water, lead-based paint, 84% of our problem has been allowed to go on for generations, over 100 years.
Mm.
But there is an opportunity, right? And the opportunity turns to say, for every dollar we invest in lead poisoning prevention in a home, we get up to $221 return on investment. Every dollar we invest in asthma reduction in a home, it's $14 a return. It's smart government, right? We move people off of depending on low-income heating assistance and being dependent there by improving weatherization, energy efficiency. And we have the opportunity to put real jobs back into the vulnerable communities and under-resourced communities in
Mhm.
terms of contractors trained to be integrated around lead, around health and safety, and around the new frontier on climate actions in homes. And those contractors will make $4,000 to $8,000 at the jump better than their peers and will be better prepared for the marketplace. And that's reinvestment. We started to deeply look at this. I'll stop, but on this one point, there was a lot of heralding, right, about a 99% reduction of childhood lead poisoning in Baltimore and in the state of Maryland, right? But in the Baltimore region, Duke University did a study around the work of GHHI and the Maryland legislature to reduce that level, right? And it said that we returned back $44.5 billion to the Maryland economy. But that money was not invested in the lowest income neighborhoods. We may have lowered and managed down lead, but we didn't improve the housing stock. We didn't do something that Elijah Cummings in his last days on earth and I had a long conversation about changing the normal in low income communities and Black and brown communities. There shouldn't be a normal that you think where you live, you're going to be cold, you're going to live in damp, dark, and dusty housing, that your kid's going to have asthma, your kid's going to have lead poisoning. That's not normal, should never be normal. And we owe it. If we want justice, right, we owe it to invest and have the turn on justice to opportunity and to real equity, to make our lowest income communities safer from flooding and safer from lead and safer from other health issues, and to be the first place that we invest our climate dollars to really engage people for what a climate crisis means, because it starts at home. I could go on, as you know, for hours. My mother said I could talk a dog off a meat wagon. And that is true when it comes to this stuff. But we have to, it's always about what's the decision we're going to make? To
Right.
do what is right and treats everyone as human beings that we love, appreciate, and want a quality of life for? Because we benefit from what kids become when they're able to go to school, be educated, and tap their creativity and their brains and their minds. So, it's the choice we make. And we probably don't, we're in a bad state in the United States around this, but we're also at the highest point of opportunity we ever have been.
So, and I love how you put that, Ruth, in the fact that there is a definitive link between poverty and environment. That you can clearly see that if your home is in a certain state, your mind essentially is going to be in a certain state. That we're seeing that, and whether you're in Baltimore City or Baltimore County, but there is a definitive link. And and I'm sure you have these many conversations, just like I've had, with people like, well, you don't have to be the product of your environment. And it's like, it's hard
If you're
a
two,
child.
if you're 2 and you ingest lead, you get asthma, right? There's mold in your house.
Right. You
There's not
can't
a lot.
change that.
Not a lot you can do.
Right.
If there's disinvestment, you will suffer through extreme heat and extreme cold, which is more than just the cost of the energy. That is respiratory disease, that is devaluation of housing, but it also causes a greater likelihood of cardiac arrest. And, we have big issues, but we also have an awful lot to learn from very low income neighborhoods and communities who have had to survive and have known how to protect resources, even when under-resourced. We have many good lessons. We probably don't have a better opportunity to have leaders in climate than investing in our under-resourced communities.
Absolutely. Great point. I want to bring Imani Imani into this part of the conversation. Imani, you're in I think you have a powerful story in that you are part of a family that understood, or that understands, the importance of agriculture, aquaculture, the environment. One of the things that Ruth brought up, which made me think, oh, let me pick Imani's brain on this one. Generational wealth transfer. And that's important because you are a part of a tradition, a long line, as we said in the beginning, of oyster farmers. You're building a career in the aquaculture industry, but essentially the generational wealth transfer is knowledge. It's not just the work of oyster farming, it's understanding how things, aquaculture, how that, happens. It's about understanding how the environment works with us being a part of it. So it's that knowledge. Is that something, first and foremost, do you see that generational wealth transfer as being knowledge? And then secondly, how do we get the process of getting other young people and other families to break the cycle of generational of environmental ignorance to becoming much more engaged?
Yeah, no, that's a really, really great question. And yeah, I think one of the things that really stood out that you and Ruth said were that, you really are the product of your environment, and there is a direct consciousness between your relationship with the environment and your relationship with yourself. And a lot of people don't know that. A lot of people aren't aware of that. And so for me in particular, I come from a 200-year-long, family history of watermen on the Chesapeake Bay on the Eastern Shore of Maryland, but it skipped a few generations. But what I think really kind of kept it in my view site was that I lived on the Eastern Shore of Maryland. That is the coastal community. That is a part of, our DNA. That's a part of, our pride of Maryland. So it was always something that I was exposed to. I was exposed to science camps. I was exposed to math camps. I was exposed to outdoor camps. And so that really, every time I would go to a camp, it would ignite, it would add to the flame a little bit more, to where, I was as young as 7 years old. And I still remember the camp that really changed my life and made me decide that that's what I wanted to do. So yeah, I think that, it's generational knowledge, it's local ecological knowledge that people really aren't aware of. You know, I feel like we really miss the mark sometimes in communities because we want to really put our environmental programs on like a one size fits all, when each community has different characteristics, each person, individual has different characteristics. And so what works in a coastal community is definitely not going to work in Baltimore. And that's one of the foundations of Minorities in Aquaculture, is really realizing what is the characteristics of those communities, what are their actual needs, and then meeting them where they are as far as their environmental education, not skipping a bunch of steps, being like, okay, well, if you're at level 2, okay, well, let's work up to that. Like, let's work on your relationship with your everyday environment. I can show you what a dolphin looks like. I can show you what an oyster looks like. But if after that day, you never see that organism again, other in books or on TV or something, then it doesn't really seem possible. But if I, you know, educate young kids about where their water comes from, the situations that are going on in their own backyard, when they turn on that sink or turn on that shower or anything, they'll think of that fact. And then once they have that foundation, then you can grow on that. So yeah, I think it's super important to just really, like I said, meet people where they are with their environmental education. And I think that that's one of the things that I hope to change. That was one of the things that I know that I loved apart going, you know, being younger and doing camps and doing programs and stuff, was how, you know, it really just was an influx of information. But it wasn't until I started doing, you know, Minorities in Aquaculture and then, you know, trying to complete my master's in historical minority engagement in the Chesapeake that I realized that that was a part of the missing gap. And there's like some other things in there too that we really have to start addressing if we really want to mend the relationship between our communities and their environment.
No, that's an excellent point. And that brings me to Nadia, because Nadia, with the work that you're doing with 0 Hour and the youth climate movement, you know, as I'm listening to Imani, I'm thinking to myself, you know, is this an issue of making, you know, environmental work look cool, or is this really something where people are kind of so detached from understanding how they fit in a larger ecosystem that they just don't even really think about it? You know what I mean? Like, you know, how do we make sure that we get the next generation of young people engaged? Like, you know, I know about Greta. I know about, you know, when we see these big platforms, and Nadia, you've been on these big platforms, you've been featured in People, you spoke at the United Nations, but it still feels far off based upon how people, like, I'm literally see people in Baltimore City, something very simple, y'all might see it in Baltimore County, walking down the street, got a can, drinking soda, boop, right on the ground. Just something very simple. And then you know, I've had I've had conversations like, you know, well, why are you throwing? I mean, the trash can is right there. You know, oh, it's not my fault. I don't need to worry about that. I don't need to pick that up. This blatant disregard, and I think that what Imani was mentioning about the fact that if you don't see yourself as part of this ecosystem, if you're not constantly exposed to those things, then it's not going to, you're not going to get involved. What's your take on that, Nadia?
Yeah, I think it's really true that a lot of people are detached from the issue. And I think that people are starting to be more aware of it. And it's hard because sometimes we see things that happen in our like normal daily lives that we don't really take as like being a part of climate change. Like the fact that the weather recently, it'll go from like 30 degrees to like 70 degrees back to like 30, 40 degrees, just like that inconsistency already is like a symptom of climate change. And I think like educating people and telling them like this is what's happening and it's going to get worse over time, and talking about the possible like risks and letting people know that how their lives will be affected in the future. And I think storytelling is so important when it comes to that, and telling stories of people that are already being affected, because a lot of times we talk about climate change like it's going to be like in the future, and when we say future, we don't know if that means like tomorrow or like 20 years. And just making sure that people know that people are being affected right now, that it's happening right now. It's not some issue for 2050, 2040, and that action can be taken in like 5 years, and that action needs to be taken now. And like Imani was saying, like being a part of ecosystem, I don't know when it happened, but I feel like there's such a rift between people and the environment and understanding that this is our home, that we used to live so closely with the land, from the land, and now we're so divided and people don't even go outside often that anymore. And just like understanding the connection that brings, and yeah, storytelling through that as well.
I mean, I think that's an excellent point. And I think the other part of it is just the simple fact that people were distracted about other things. Like, we have a lot of things on our plate. And I know, a young woman like yourself, 19 years old, you're thinking about everything from school to family to social life to all of those things, but we're distracted in the sense of understanding things. And I also believe that because environmental justice is as a community organizer, I have to confront this often. Environmental justice work is a marathon. It's not a sprint. So there's no tangible goal. You can't say, oh, we got new trees today. Like, you can count the trees. Like, there's no tangible goal. So, I think for a lot of young people who have very short time, patience, they get into this work and they say, oh man, we got to clean the water. And I think that's how it's presented. We need clean water. And it's like, well, hell, that might take 25, 30 years. Mr. Lafferty is probably, he probably been wanting clean water since he started his career. But the point is like, maybe there is just that we need to do as I was taught as a community organizer, to give low-hanging fruit. What's the low-hanging fruit for the environment justice work youth climate movement?
What do you mean by low hanging fruit? I'm sorry, I don't
Like
understand.
a short goal. What is the short goal that we can start working toward?
Yeah, I think just like action right now, and in terms of like legislation, and getting funding for climate action, having something like a Green New Deal and having a just transition to renewable energy is what we need right now. And also just fossil fuel infrastructure being taken down and defunding that infrastructure. Biden has promised so much nationally and like nothing has happened. And it's hard because, like you said, like the marathon, we keep asking, we keep putting pressure, and we keep having demonstrations and doing more and more, but at the end of the day, like nothing is really budging, nothing is happening. And I feel like we're still in a similar situation of where we were a few years ago in a way.
Nadia, when Governor Hochul in New York banned or said they weren't going to support the fossil fuel, the gas kind of pipelines and different things, and shut down funding. These are actions that I think are right, or concrete and real, and people can see. But I do think we have to personalize it to have what people can see and feel in their own lives a lot, because I do think that low-hanging fruit, and by the way, I just saw a generational difference between the two of you, so made me feel better on that. But I do think that the bottom line is people need to feel that they can see it, and that there is something that they can participate in that makes a difference, and trying to figure out both of those and making environmental justice a way of life, not a thing over there, and not we can't make up for the past, but what we can do is start to make it a part of our ethos and our lives today. And that does take things like legislation and leadership to be part of laws and compliance that people can move to. But it's also then that humanization. And I think you just said it so well. So sorry to interrupt on that.
No, that's an excellent point. Folks, I want to let everyone know that you can start submitting your questions in the Q&A. And in a few moments, we'll start posing those questions to our wonderful panelists and getting some more insight about this larger question of environmental justice and sustainability.
So Faraji,
yes.
may I add something?
Sure.
I think I just heard some really thoughtful connections being made by Imani and Nadia, and then Ruth Ann. I look at it from the perspective that we need to be, and I think that Imani said this, we need to be meeting folks where they are. We can't continue to talk about climate change or decarbonization or clean water, only in sort of scientific or very technical terms. We need folks to understand that, you know what, it has been getting hotter. Over the last 10, 15, 20 years, it has been getting hotter. We are seeing more days with what we call high heat, which is greater than 95 degrees, in the summer. And the way that this is impacting poorer communities or wealthier communities, there is a significant difference. Many folks in poorer neighborhoods, unfortunately, often in higher percentage neighborhoods with Black and brown residents, they experience heat differently. They may not have ready access to indoor air conditioning. They may not have ready access to a car that can take them to a cooling center. And they are less likely to have old, mature trees shading their homes and shading their streets. For the past couple of years, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, which is a federal agency, has been doing research in cities. And we did it in Baltimore City, I think back in 2017, where volunteers put air sensors and temperature sensors on their cars, and they drove specific routes in the city at 3 times over the course of the day. So everybody drove their route at 9 a.m., maybe 3 p.m., and then at 9 p.m. to measure temperatures. And in Baltimore City, on this same day, the leafy, greener neighborhoods of North Baltimore City were up to 15 degrees cooler than some of the dense row house communities in West Baltimore that have that housing stock that hasn't been updated, as Ruth Ann was saying, streets that no longer have trees, and communities that no longer have access to green spaces or other shady places. And we see this repeated. They've done the work in DC, they've done it in Richmond, they've done it in big cities across the country, and it is showing the same pattern. And so we need to be acknowledging, and we need to be talking in those kinds of terms that, as Nadia said, this isn't something that's going to happen 50 years from now. This is already happening now. It is raining more. It is flooding more. We are having more heat and all of the associated stressors that come with that. That is happening now, and we don't need to attribute it to an anomaly or a particularly bad year or El Nino or something else. This is the reality, and it's only going to get worse, as Nadia said.
I want to, and I appreciate that, Jen, because I want to bring Mr. Lafferty, I want to bring you back into that, because as I was listening to Jen talking about just the heat index in various neighborhoods, it came out just about a day ago with the University of Maryland School of Public Health is set to receive $100,000 in a federal grant to upgrade the EPA's mapping tool that tracks issues such as the concentration of homes with lead paint, proximity to the traffic, the ozone level in the air, and other hazards. And when we're looking at the fact that these mapping tools need to be upgraded, and that essentially that we need these tools in order for us to gain some understanding about how serious the situation is. Talk to us about how communities can use tools and data to avoid problems and possibly make more environmentally conscious decisions? And then I have a second question about the county's master planning process, but if you can you speak to that, Mr. Lafferty?
I'll give it a shot. I think that each of, as we're getting more sophisticated tools, and certainly an app as opposed to something that you have to have access through Adobe or some of the other technologies, are going to become increasingly important. And in fact, there was some discussions, and I'm not sure if they're actually working on it now, creating an app in the county so that people could actually track changes in climate and what the impacts are. Because to pick up on what Jen was saying, because you're seeing a change in the warming patterns and the rain patterns, that also means the environment is changing, because growing seasons change, the number of pests or animals and their life cycles are changing. So the whole ecology really starts to be altered. And I think as more people in more vulnerable communities start to utilize these same tools, they can then better educate the elected and appointed officials about what the problems are that they're seeing. Government officials can't be everywhere to know exactly what the challenges may be in a particular community. And the better educated and more accessible these tools are, people can better help. And go back to your comment before about the $60 million in ARPA money. We're hearing a lot of issues from people who are literally on the ground. They're seeing the problems and the challenges in their communities all the time. And that better educates the decision makers about what does need to be changed. And certainly flooding is, I think, one of the more prominent examples for that, as well as access to open space. There are equity trackers that the state has and that others have that probably are not being utilized as effectively to see where investment should be made to make sure, for instance, that there are parks and other places available. The county is getting more sophisticated as a jurisdiction in using these kind of tools, but we're still fairly far behind. You're on mute.
Sorry. That brings me to the next question, Mr. Lafferty, about the county's master planning process in advancing the environmental interests of minorities and underserved communities. Give us some insight as to what that master plan looks like, and most importantly, what has been the mechanism or the platform that can bring more minorities into that discussion?
Well, we don't have, the plan is still being built, so we don't have a plan in place, but I'll say that we went through a community engagement process, and about 1,000 people participated over a period of months. The ratio of people of color, particularly Black and African Americans who participated, was a little bit higher than the ratio of those who actually live in the county. We were underrepresented in the number of Latinos or Latinx participants, harder to reach in many regards. Fortunately, the county has just hired an immigrant affairs official, so she is going to be really a clear improvement in our outreach strategy. We held over 50 community meetings in order to get the voices of everybody that we could. We still have had a challenge getting into some of the communities where, again, the Latino and Hispanic communities are a bit harder to reach into, but we're also trying to reach through the churches and faith-based groups to use them as an access point. One of the bigger challenges has been getting to the youth. Probably 2% or less of all the people who've participated are 19 or younger. And that, I think, is because our engagements have probably been sort of the old-fashioned through Facebook and through the web and things, and not using more modern platforms in order to Instagram or others that we could use. And that's part of our learning curve as well, is how do we change that around? I will say that two of the themes that are woven throughout the entire master planning process are equity and sustainability. And it's our intent to make sure that it's not a separate section or part of the plan. It is integrated throughout the plan. And we've heard a number of comments on the equity side about affordable housing, about the need for better school programs across the board, about access to open space, as well as transit. And then on the sustainability side, it goes all the way from recycling to, again, more open space, and finding different strategies around renewable energy, people looking to the future. So it hasn't been as robust as we'd like to see, but it's been a heck of a lot more robust than what we've seen in recent years.
So there is an opportunity for members of underserved communities to get involved at this point.
Absolutely. And we're going to be doing another round of outreach in the communities. And of course, anybody who wants to reach out to us and invite us in to talk with them, or to open up a door to talk to other groups, that is something we're really eager to do. And I want to thank Troy Williams from our Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion for helping to make that happen on fronts that we would not have had access to in the past.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Mr. Lafferty, thank you so much. I want to take a couple of questions from our watchers. Folks have been checking in on our Q&A, and folks, so please just ask any question. There's no such thing as a stupid question, especially when you're talking about a conversation like environmental justice and sustainability, because there are so many different connotations of what these terms mean. But now you have people on the ground, student leaders, officials that work within the Baltimore County administration that can give us some clarity about the fuzzy parts of understanding this big issue. Let me start with, looks like, is this, how do we get these mapping tools into the hands of community? This is from Brenda. How do we get these mapping tools in the hands of community members? Whose responsibility is this? It sounds unfair to place the burden of providing the data on those most vulnerable and suffering without an all-out effort to connect them to these assessment tools. Ruth Ann, I see you shaking.
Well, paid attention when you said that the University of Maryland's going to update the mapping tool on things like lead paint and other things. I sit on the EPA's Children's Health Environmental Protection Council. And one of the things that's so critical is you can't have these tools on the web. We need to be able to put them on phones that people can do, link to things. And so if the person who's asking the question wants to connect to me, I can put my email in the chat, because we are really pushing EPA, but our own selves, our own organization, to take a tool, a handheld app that you can walk around your house and your neighborhood and note conditions, and then it will link you to the resources. And so I'd like to talk more about that online. And I think that probably Sakobi Wilson's group down in the University of Maryland, who is going to be updating that. If you do another one of these panels, he's a great person to bring to the public. But I do agree, these tools, and I think Steve was alluding to this, have to be in the hands of people. This is that human connection that gets people engaged. It creates movement. It makes people feel that they can do something. If you feel like you cannot contribute to something, you will care about it so incredibly less. And we think that people who are in distressed communities are in tight situations, not by their own doing, that they don't want to contribute and they only want services. We are completely wrong-headed about that. People want to contribute because they want to be owners.
Yeah.
And if we want to give ownership, got to get that data in the hands. So please contact me, whoever asked that question, at ranorton@ghhi.org. We've got to push on this a bunch.
Absolutely, absolutely, Ruth Ann, thank you so much. I want to ask another question, and Imani, this kind of covers your part of the state. It's not really a question, but Bonnie said, thanks for the shout out to Faith Communities. Interfaith Partners for the Chesapeake is actively working with congregations to engage them in environmental justice, including engaging with their youth groups. Bonnie Sorak put her contact out there. She said, we often quote Wendell Berry, do unto those downstream as you would have those upstream do unto you. But as I read and was thinking about the Chesapeake and the work that you're doing down there with the aquaculture industry, connecting with the churches, getting the churches involved. How important is that? In Baltimore City, there is Pastor Heber Brown runs he does a powerful work with the Food Security Church Network. Food Security Network that comes out of his personal churches and network of churches around the city and across the state and around the country. Do we need to establish some level of aquaculture, initiative or project where churches, because there are so many churches and they have access to people that we probably won't have access to, do we need to start creating some programs and initiatives and projects within those faith institutions, especially along the Chesapeake?
Yeah, I think that would be a great idea. And I actually think that fits into my most recent project in South Baltimore, in Cherry Hill and Middle Branch specifically. I'm on a team building the first aquaculture and environmental education facility that's going to sit right on the water. As far as like getting into the communities and doing those things, we are trying to reach out to community leaders. We really want that conversation is super important to us because they are the ones that, like you said, are engaging with the community on a regular basis. They are having these conversations. And I think that one of the things that's super important to us as well that hasn't really been done in the past is going to those community leaders and asking for their input, asking what do their communities need, asking them, what has been seen for them as the issues, and then seeing if we can address those things first, and then adding them to our list of things that we feel that we need to be addressing. So yeah, food security, food insecurity, especially, in Baltimore, is a huge thing.
Yeah.
Something, one of the reasons why Minorities in Aquaculture came to be, because it's a human right, or at least I feel like it's a human right to know where your food comes from, especially seafood, especially a place like Maryland where, we take a lot of pride in our seafood. I think that everyone should have access to that. Everyone should have access into knowing where their food is coming from, especially people that are in those food deserts that, have to travel outside of their county or their city to get fresh food. So there's a lot of really cool projects that are happening right now in Cherry Hill and in South Baltimore that are trying to address those things. So I'm just super happy to, connect with anybody because like I said, those community leaders are super important to all the projects that I'm on right now.
Absolutely, and you have someone that is really praising the work that you're doing in South Baltimore. Kelly Quinn says, your work there is amazing. Thank you, Imani Black, for your leadership in Cherry Hill and around the Middle Branch area. So thank you for doing the work that you're doing, Imani. I want to go back to the questions, and folks, please keep your questions coming for our esteemed panel here because they have a lot of knowledge. We don't have as much time to spend, but you're talking about literally decades worth of knowledge and expertise, across the board with our panelists. And so we want you to pick their brains as much as possible. There was a question that was posed: how can we encourage or enhance access to general information in sessions like this webinar? So many people that this is especially relevant to, even though it is objectively relevant to everyone, lack access and probably have more salient concerns within their lives than spending their night attending a virtual session. Nobody want to spend time with us? What are you talking about? What is that about? But Nadia, I want to get your take on that because people are like, okay, so what? You're talking about the environment, you're talking about sustainability. But going back to that question, how do we encourage it and enhance access to general information?
I think that you can do a lot with community building and doing that in different ways, kind of just regarding the different spaces that you're in, whether it's your school community or your local area, you know, like getting a group of people together and talking about stuff and doing it in a way that's kind of fun and not in like a really like I feel like a lot of times when we talk about climate change, it can be really anxious or it can be really frustrating, but there's a way where we can connect with people where it can be really fun and we can enjoy our time together and really just connect over stuff that we share together. And so really just like coming together with people, I found a lot of times like making friends with people and talking to them kind of just through word of mouth. And also what Amani said about like meeting people where they're at, you know, like
Mhm.
seeing what do they know and kind of teaching them more or like giving them different resources or websites. We have access to so much now with the internet and social media. There's like infographics and information everywhere and it's so easily shareable now. And people don't have to come to, you know, like a webinar in the nighttime if they can't. There are different ways of getting information and accessing it. And I think just being able to share it more widely and make that more accessible is really important. But I think it's been hard with COVID, especially having different community events, but hopefully we can see ourselves doing that more as it becomes safer too.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. Ruth Ann, did you want to speak to that as well?
Well, I think Nadia really covered it. You know, I just think people are exhausted with the amount of Zooms and webinars and whatever, but if you're recording it and you put it out, don't just put it on a web, right? Let's put it on all the different platforms that people may, you know, I don't know if people are still using Reddit, but, you know,
Yeah.
Reddit and Instagram and whatever, and Twitter it and get it out there and people can do it in their own time. I've watched things at odd hours in the middle of the night, even a month or two later than they're happening because I come upon them and it hits me at that time. But I think we do have to really break that down. But I do think that with all of the information overload, we've got to get to the point quick, right? And infographics are good ways to do it, as long as at the end of it, it's like, and then what can you do? How can you contribute? What's the skill? You know, you got these skills, what can you bring? I think we have to, again, just tap people for what they can give, because once people start to get engaged in something, they can give a lot to it. I'm in a job I accepted and said I would do it for a year. I've been in it for 28 years.
Wait a minute, I think you went over your contract there, Ruth Ann.
Huh?
You went over your contract.
Well, or I'm under the radar and they don't know I'm still around. I'm not sure which, but it's either way. But it's impact, right? It's engagement that keeps people going. And I realize that 28 years, Nadia is slightly older than maybe you or Amani may be, but or half, or you too. But I just think we've it's got to be information with a hook of, if people want it to engage, how can they engage?
Yeah.
And we got to be clear about that.
Yeah. Jen, what's your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate you asking, because I feel like, you know, while I was shaking my head while Nadia was speaking, but then I was also thinking about, you know, I think it's really easy for us to forget that not everybody has ready access to the internet at all times of the day and night. There are many communities where the percentage of homes with internet, with a computer in the home, is still remarkably low. And these are sometimes the communities that we say we most want to be engaging with. And so I think, you know, this is the perennial challenge, is how to reach people, how to meaningfully engage with folks on a level that lets them know their input is important, when the kind of standard ways that we know of communicating may be reaching everybody but the folks we most need to be hearing from. And so I think there's, you know, opportunities. I was so happy to hear that, you know, Nadia is not only a community engager, but is also, uses art. I think art can be, especially public art, can be a really meaningful way to reach folks. I think the engagement work that Bonnie Sorek and her organization, Interfaith Partners for the Chesapeake, working through congregations and faith communities, and the communities that maybe rely on a particular house of worship for support in other arenas in addition to faith. I think we have to continually challenge ourselves to think outside of the box on what's easy for us. It's very easy for me to write an email and send it out and hope folks read it. And, but we need to constantly be challenging ourselves on how we reach the folks that are often hardest to reach, because they may not have the ready access that we sort of take for granted.
Right. And I think that's exactly the on, and Mr. Lafferty, I know that was one of the big things that you certainly spoke about, is the importance of the county doing that legwork, that footwork, knocking on doors, going into those neighborhoods that are often overlooked to make sure that those residents can be seen and heard. Now, I want to shift gears because there's another part of this that I want to get everyone's take on. As I'm seeing these questions come in, and folks keep bringing your questions, we love to answer them. But one of the things that, when we have these conversations about environmental justice and sustainability, should these conversations essentially start and finish with or by public officials, elected officials, corporations as well? Because if we're not seeing the conversation coming from people, the residents themselves, and corporations are bringing it up, or elected officials use it as a talking point for their reelection campaign, how do we still hold those folks and those entities accountable? And Nadia, I know this is something that you are very passionate about, making sure that we hold elected officials accountable. We hold corporations accountable. You have a lot of big corporations in Baltimore County, whether they're in Towson or some other part of the county, that do work. And I'm wondering, environmental justice right now is a hot topic. People are talking about it. The president, we saw what's going on in Annapolis. There are a number of lawmakers that are saying, oh, we need to do it. There was a commentary that ran in the Baltimore Sun saying that the next governor for the state of Maryland needs to put climate at the top of the list of the priorities. So we know that it's popular, but when you get down to the brass tacks of things, Nadia, how do we start the process of holding these folks and these corporations accountable?
Yeah, I think that's it's a little bit of a tough question, because it's something that I feel like me and a lot of my peers have been trying to do for a while, but even then we haven't gotten too far in a way. And I think we have to build people power and make sure that people are being educated and that people are coming out and they're showing out and taking their time of day to, come to protests, to come to demonstrations and sign petitions and do the different stuff to be heard, really. And even then, I feel like a lot of times a lot of elected officials don't listen. I always say that they listen to respond and not listen to understand. And it's been difficult finding elected officials that will take part and actually listen. But when they do, it's nice. But
is it, wait a minute, when you say it's nice, like it's surprising nice, like, oh, they actually listened.
Yeah, it is because most of my experiences has been they just kind of like gloss over most stuff. In corporations especially, I think just considering profit over people, really, and not thinking of human needs and thinking of their needs as like an entity first. Yeah, and even then, like, I've seen a lot of corporations like get young like climate activists to like be in their ads and do like ad campaigns with them. And we've kind of crafted new terms for that called greenwashing and youth washing, where they'll use young people to be like, oh, look at all this great climate stuff we're doing when really the way that they still produce their product is not sustainable at all, and they're still contributing to the capitalistic effects of kind of just taking more and more energy and resources.
So I want to make sure that we don't gloss over the big nugget of that jewel you just dropped on us. What do you call that? Greenwashing?
Greenwashing or youth washing. Yeah.
Wow. Wow. So greenwashing is when you get a climate activist to serve as like a salesperson for a corporation.
Yeah, I think it can manifest in a lot of different ways, but there's been a lot of like climate influencers recently that will like do partnerships with corporations and kind of be like, oh, this clothing is good and sustainable, when they're still like being a part of like the fast fashion industry and like producing a lot of waste, and they're not producing their material sustainably. And I think it's happened in a lot of different ways. It doesn't always have to include a young person. They'll but it just feels like corporations just want to keep making money. You know, they're going to shift slightly, but they're never going to fully change the way that they work, of course, because the way that they work is inherently going to always be very tied with capitalism and the destruction of the planet, I believe.
Raji, if I can jump in.
Please, Mr. Lafferty, because she just blew me away with that one. Go ahead. Yes, sir.
Well, I go back to a couple things that were said about how do you hold people accountable, and generally, and as a former elected official, one is there are organizations like League Conservation Voters that issues report cards on the legislature, Maryland legislature, as a way of holding them accountable. So supporting organizations that by their mission in part are holding people accountable. And believe me, one of the things that people always want to know is this vote going to be scored, so I know whether or not to pay attention to it. The other thing that I've not heard yet is voting. And if we don't organize more young people to get involved in voting, elected officials don't have to listen, essentially. So how do we foster an environmental voting movement, as it were, to make sure that people are educated about the issues that they can then challenge candidates and elected officials, so that in fact they are listening to the messages that are so critical. And it's not just young people, it's whether it's around EJ or equity or sustainability or climate. There needs to be a different mobilization. We cannot turn over the reins of our democracy to the uninformed. That you really have to do that. And I don't disagree with Nadia's point that a lot of people go, that's a very nice thought, thank you very much, and walk away. But I think you're going to have I'm a believer in more local level impacts than national impacts. I just get lost at the concept of trying to change Congress, but the county council members, county executives, the state legislature, which are really making decisions all the time that affect us very, very directly. The placement of landfills and whether or not we incinerate, or how are we addressing, Ruth Ann's successes over time have been at the local level. Not as much as she would have wanted or we would have needed to see, addressing lead in schools, lead in school drinking water, those kind of issues. I think we need to get people mobilized to vote and participate too. And that's a level of accountability.
Mr. Lafferty, I'm wondering, you brought up the League of Conservation Voters. When you have groups like that, whether it's even the NAACP or the Urban League or other, the League of Women Voters or whatever the group may be, and you put out these report cards, because I see these report cards all the time. I talk about it. Everybody's like, oh, this person, gets an A or a B or an F. And I'm wondering to myself, do elected officials really care? I mean, or do they really care about getting a bad grade for an issue like this? Or are they more concerned about, just their reelection? You know what I mean? Is it like, okay, we're going to do a little something here, a little piece of legislation here, because I do want to make sure I get reelected for the next term?
Well, sometimes they're intertwined because very often, I was always a person very proud of the fact that I would get 100% from the League of Conservation Voters, because I then wanted to tell my constituents that I support the issues that are important to them, as well as to protecting the environment. Would that help me with re-election? That was sort of the intent, of course, but it wasn't a faux commitment to the environment. And so I'd say yes. I think a lot of elected officials are paying close attention to issues such as this. And I think finally, environmental justice is raising itself up as one of those issues that people are going to have to take positions on and to make changes. Sorry to take so much time.
No, absolutely. I appreciate the time. Folks, we have a few moments left in tonight's conversation, and many of you are still staying engaged, so we truly appreciate that. I want to bring up, as we wrap up this discussion, that, more and more people are saying, okay, Anita posted, for example, now that we have started the conversation with this webinar, what else can we as a library system do to continue the conversation? Anyone wants to, Jen or?
I
Oh,
Go ahead,
Nadia,
Nadia.
yes.
Go ahead.
I'm from the county, and I used to go to my local library a lot, the Perry Hall Library, and I just loved the atmosphere there. And I was really sad when it was closed for COVID for so long, because I think it was the one thing that was closed for longest. It only recently reopened a few months ago, but I think engaging children more. I always loved the little kids space when I was younger, and maybe just having more resources like physically available in the library, maybe like pamphlets or different like in-person activities that can happen if it's safe. And yeah, just like really trying to build community in that way, or educate people in a way that books and libraries have done for so long.
Awesome.
I
Thank you,
think this
Nadia.
idea of engaging kids, not taking for granted that kids very, very young. I think Amani would tell us, right, that's what in growing up in a culture, you take that in from a very young age of caring for the environment, or how, my mother was a recycler back when people didn't do that. And you get those impressions, and we have to really bank in deep on all these issues of education from the youngest moments we can, if we really want generational change. But I want to go back one moment about this idea of everything that's local. First of all, I miss Steve Lafferty in the Maryland legislature, because he was a person who was present when you talked to him and listened. And I'm sure you still are what you're doing now, Steve, but that's important. But, we can look at what, for me, I think are the sort of people who are making the world a little crazy in the United States. And what I remember as a kid is sort of these highly conservative alt-right people were starting to think about city council, county council, school boards generations ago. And now they are sitting doing some things that people like myself find very, very troubling. So we have to start early. It's a long game of cultural change. But I think that we have so much information that when Nadia was talking about like going upstream and figuring out whether these companies are really sustainable in practices, using that information, but engaging people. And as Steve said, we actually have to do this at the ballot box. And we have to do it in big numbers consistently at the ballot box to achieve the things we've been talking about tonight. And getting people to trust the vote, that it's important, is so critical. And I can't say that enough. But I think as a county, it's amazing you're doing this, and putting it out in audio, video, visual ways, and then through every medium possible, and keep doing it. I saw the list of other things coming up. Just make this can become part of that library habit that we grew up with, right?
Absolutely. And Ruth Ann, when I think about what you just said in terms of the ballot, there's always a question about the environment in every election, right? And I think a lot of people just don't know how to process that question, or they don't know like what the impact is. So, and if you look at the ballot and you say, oh, we're giving $2 million, do you want to give $2 million towards the conservation of the Chesapeake Bay? I mean, nobody is going to be like, no. I mean, I guess somebody's going to say no, but but we don't know exactly how that $2 million will be allocated. We don't know what is going to be going on. So, to add to your point about understanding the issues that are going to end up on the ballot, so that way you can become an informed voter, an informed citizen. So when you're going into the ballot box, you're not just playing, it's not eeny, meeny, miny, mo. Oh, okay, I did C in the last one. Let me just choose B on this one. It's like really understanding. And part of it, and I've seen this on ballots in Baltimore City, you have so many questions, like question A through J. After a while, you pick your person that you want to run for office, that you support, and then you get to questions, all these questions, and it's like.
And then they word the questions pretty tricky sometimes.
Right, you know what I mean? Your head
you're voting for it.
Right. Your head starts spinning, and then you go back home and say, did you vote for the question? Like, yeah, I voted for, building up a park or a beautification project. And you're like, I didn't vote for that because I didn't know what that meant. And then that, I mean, Mr. Lafferty, you laughing, people just don't know.
But if we can make ballot measures a little more sexy, right?
Yeah.
It does put a mandate to people who are elected of what needs to happen and where the public will is. And I don't think we put enough time, money, and interest. I mean, the only ballot measure I can remember, a few, I mean, good ones on guns and different things, but with slots. Like, so much money was spent on the gambling ballot measures, but I'd rather see a lot more money be spent on the stormwater issues, the things that matter. And I will say one thing that's been important and surprise to me is some of the big funders that have come in the world of doing good, that have come because of the climate issue, are helping issues like the stuff I work on. They're bringing us along with funding and scale that we never had. And I think there's some really important kind of lessons out of that about how do we localize that in some of these issues.
Great point. Jen, I want to get your take on bringing, how the library system can continue these conversations. What's your take?
I mean, I like what I've heard, from Nadia, from Ruth Ann, and from others. I think framing these kinds of events, whether they're in person or virtual, as conversations. Folks need to feel like they're not one of, 1,000 people sitting in a room and they don't have the opportunity to weigh in or to ask questions or to relate to the folks who are, on the panel. And I think these kinds of conversations are exactly what we need more of, not less. And I think, maybe having these in series, or maybe having these kinds of conversations at local branches. Nadia made a real connection to her local library, where she went and why she liked going there. And so while a virtual conversation may meet, or reach more folks, you might actually get more robust engagement and conversation with a smaller group, in a particular library branch. So I think there's lots of opportunities, and I think focusing on the quality of the conversation more so than maybe the quantity of folks in the audience, may really spur some discussions and some thought-provoking things that, can help make a difference.
Absolutely.
I wanted to add just one more point to the whole voting conversation, and it's making a connection to something that Nadia said. Nadia, by the way, I'm your new biggest fan. I just agree with pretty much everything you've said tonight. But related to sort of the, the business community, I think we can vote much more often than, say, every 4 years in a municipal or a state election. I think we can vote with our wallet every single time we make a choice about where we buy our clothing, or where we, get a cup of coffee, or whether or not we buy into, the litany of unsustainable convenience items that are out there.
Mhm.
And for me, a huge tenet of sustainability is really thinking about the impacts of those purchasing decisions on the future. And the future might be, a week from now when I throw it away, or it might be 10 years from now when that piece of plastic is still in its same form. And so we can make conscious decisions about what and where we purchase
Mhm.
every single day.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's an excellent point. Excellent point. Imani, I want to get you the opportunity to speak on how do we continue the conversation beyond the virtual discussion that we have tonight.
Yeah, well, I think that everybody has said really great answers, and so I totally agree. I'm fans of everybody right now, so I think so I'm just like, listening to, I'm being an innocent bystander on a great conversation, I feel like. So, but yeah, I think that, just like everyone said, is like really just making sure that engagement is just always consistent, especially about things that are, I don't want to say like immediate threats, but are, high alert in communities. Those things kind of need to be engaged with, every week, every 2 weeks, whether it's a whole series or whatever it is. I think that those are super important. But yeah, outside of this also too, it's just like having conversations within your inner circles, finding those organizations that you really can get behind and support and back, their mission and their efforts, and putting them on your platforms, and showing people that it starts with you as an individual, and like Jen said, just the decisions that you make, the money that you spend, and things like that. Once you really dive into those logistics and those details of your life, you see the quality of your life improving. And I think that everybody wants their quality of life to improve. Everyone wants to feel happy with the choices that they make. And so yeah, I think that just giving yourself that knowledge, giving yourself those just those skills and just those different resources are really great, just so for you to learn and just for you to pass on that information as you go on and do whatever you do in your career and your profession, your everyday life.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Imani, thank you so much. I would just throw in there, one of the things that I personally do is that I volunteer my time with my son goes to the Friends School here in Baltimore City. And so volunteer my time with the environmental justice students. Every year they put on, the past couple of years, they've been putting on virtual discussions, and, I've been getting involved as much as I can. So when you're talking about how do we have conversations like this beyond what the Baltimore County Public Library system is doing, get involved in your school, in your children's school, your grandchildren's school, your nieces and nephews' school. I mean, and I think, Ruth Ann, you brought up this point, which is a lot of this stuff is going to take many years to change. However, if you start to plant the seed now, like what we're seeing with Nadia, with Imani, you start to plant those seeds, they're going to manifest and germinate great thinkers of, about the environment and the climate. So, we sometimes reach for the older folks, but it's the younger folks that are going to see the full impact of what this environment is going to, how things are going to look in the next 20 years, That's the burden of this generation. And so, it's get involved in the school, start a club wherever you are, whether it's in, a community center, or whether it's in the library branch that is near your home, but ask the librarians there, hey, can we start something here dealing with environmental justice? I mean, small steps make a big difference, folks. Let's not lose sight of that. And all of the panelists that you've seen here tonight, they took the very small step of saying, I'm going to do something to change what I see around me. And they're making a big difference. And it's putting them on a path to continue to make change on a fundamental level and for us to enjoy the conversation that we've had tonight. So just something for us to think about. Generally, at the end of the discussions, I have all of the panelists say their, how people can get in touch. But tonight, I think that it would be more impactful if we just ask everybody to put your email address. I know, Ruth Ann, you did for yourself already, but just put your email address into the chat so people can just reach out to you directly. Because I know it's about 8:42 right now. So people's brains are just probably squishy at this point to try to hear and take in more information. So just please put your email address on how people can reach you. And, in that way they can follow up with you. And for those folks that are still with us this evening at this point, we appreciate each and every one of you for taking the time out. I mean, this is a conversation that I think that needs to happen. And I know many of you have already expressed your thanks toward our wonderful and esteemed panelists. So we're going to continue to have these conversations. I know from the Baltimore County Public Library System, but personally, I've enjoyed just at least moderating and learning about ways and things that are happening within the aquaculture, to the environmental justice movement, to sustainability. I'm learning just like you're learning, and I'm so happy to learn from these wonderful panelists tonight. So you folks, you all can just reach out to them directly and let's start making some changes. So I want to thank Mr. Steve Lafferty. I want to thank Nadia Nazar. I want to thank Ms. Ruth Ann Norton. I want to thank Ms. Jen Iosa. And certainly I want to thank Ms. Imani Black for taking time out to be a part of this wonderful conversation. And again, we thank the Baltimore County Public Library System for hosting this wonderful panel. Brenda, I think we're going to turn it back to you.
Thank you, Faraji, and
You're
thank
welcome.
you all.
Great job, Faraji.
Great
Oh,
job.
thank you.
As
Exactly.
usual. Thank you, everyone, for a truly informative conversation. Thank you to Faraji and our impassioned panel, and to our audience members for all of your questions and engagement. We are glad to have had this opportunity to amplify the voices of fighters championing environmental health for all on the front lines. We touched on a lot of solutions toward addressing the disparities around environmental health. We learned that we must break the cycle of environmental ignorance and give people ecological knowledge from where they are, not just in scientific terms, so that people know that climate change is happening now. And how do we pull those without access into the conversation? How do we build people power? How do we foster an environmental voting movement? The government must make better decisions to reinvest in Black and Brown communities, and leaders must listen to understand, not to just respond. Churches, faith communities, community leaders, school groups, the business community, everyday citizens, our purchasing decisions, volunteerism, all play a role in ensuring that leaders are held accountable so that all people, regardless of race or status, get equal protection from the worst effects of climate change, and we can lead a different path. Thank you, everyone, for attending, and have a wonderful night.